Imagine giving a man a choice between two, like, incredibly painful scenarios.
Okay, lovely.
So, scenario A is that you can be completely unloved and alone for the rest of your life. Like, nobody cares about you at all, no affection, nothing.
Right, that sounds awful.
Yeah, but then there's scenario B. You can have love, right? You have a partner, but everyone around you, including that partner, secretly views you as totally inadequate and they actively disrespect you.
Oh, wow. That's a brutal choice.
It is. But what do you think he chooses? Because according to the data we are looking at today, a staggering 74% of men would actually choose to be completely unloved and alone.
I mean, it's just a completely jarring statistic. You hear that?
Yeah.
And it kind of forces a total recalibration of how we assume human attachment works, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
Because like the ultimate universal human currency, the
Yep.
one thing everyone prioritizes above literally everything else.
Yeah, all the movies say love conquers all, right?
Right. But that massive 74% margin suggests there is an entirely different hierarchy of needs operating right beneath the surface for men.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. That statistic is really the beating heart of our mission today.
It really is.
We are exploring a fascinating and honestly sometimes controversial collection of texts and promotional materials, and they are all singularly focused on deciphering male psychology and the hidden dynamics of romantic relationships.
Yeah, we've got a pretty big stack of excerpts today from popular guides.
We do. There's titles like Deciphering the Male Mind, A Guide to Commitment, and another one called The Foundation of Male Devotion, Respect, Desire, and Peace.
And we're also going to dissect the promotional copy for this heavily marketed $9 audiobook titled Mastering the Game.
Yeah, that promo copy is wild, but I mean, it's a very specific, highly lucrative genre of relationship literature out
Oh,
there.
absolutely. These are the guys that promise to, lift the veil,
Yeah.
to give the listener the secret playbook on what men are actually thinking and feeling behind the scenes.
Especially when their outward behavior makes absolutely no sense to the people dating them.
Right, exactly. Which happens a lot.
It does. Now, before we really get into the weeds here, I want to establish a very clear, very explicit impartiality disclaimer.
Good idea.
Our goal today is to explore the arguments, the biological claims, the data, and the overall philosophies laid out in these specific texts. We are not taking a side.
No.
We are not endorsing these relationship models. I mean, there is some deeply polarizing material in here about gender roles, evolutionary psychology, all these behavioral strategies.
Yeah, it gets pretty intense.
So our mission is purely to unpack what these authors claim about male behavior, figure out the mechanisms they say drive commitment, and just examine the strategies they are selling to you, the listener. We are strictly your decoders today.
And the roadmap for this journey is basically going to follow the progression of a relationship timeline right from the very beginning.
Yeah, starting with the really chaotic stuff.
Exactly. We will look at how these guides define the evolution of male behavior. Moving from the confusion of adolescence right through that notorious dating landscape of the early 20s.
Oh man, the early 20s.
Right. Then we'll transition into the biological and psychological triggers that explain why grown men suddenly pull away just when things get serious.
That's the part that I think drives everyone crazy.
For sure. And from there, we unpack that shocking 74% statistic and the data behind what men actually value most.
Spoiler, it's not what society tells us.
Not at all. And finally, we will break down the controversial high-value playbook. The step-by-step strategy these authors claim will secure lasting commitment.
So where does this all actually start?
Yeah.
Because if we are trying to decode adult male behavior, the authors of Deciphering the Male Mind argue that we have to look at the baseline.
And the baseline, according to them, is the teenage years.
Right. And the fundamental question they tackle right out of the gate is one that I think, anyone who has ever dated a guy has agonized over at some point.
Right. The hot and cold thing.
Yes. Why does he act so incredibly hot and into you one day and then completely freezing cold the very next day?
Well, the explanation they provide is heavily rooted in biology and social defense mechanisms.
Okay, so it's not just them being jerks.
Not according to the text. These guys argue that in those formative teenage years, you are not dealing with a fully formed emotional profile.
Right.
You are dealing with this crazy cocktail of shifting hormones, intense peer pressure, and this is the critical part, a deep-seated, overriding fear of appearing weak.
A fear of appearing weak. That's an interesting lens to look through.
It changes the perspective, doesn't it?
It totally shifts the blame because
Yeah.
when you are on the receiving end of that hot and cold behavior, it's agonizing.
Oh, absolutely.
You are sitting there, rereading text messages, wondering what you said wrong, wondering if your outfit was weird or something. You just internalize all of his distance.
Yeah, you make it about yourself.
Exactly. But the premise here is that his sudden withdrawal is almost never actually about you. It's an internal calibration issue on his end.
Exactly. The young man is basically portrayed as being in a near constant state of emotional overwhelm.
Just flooded with feelings.
Right. The neurological development happening in a teenage male, particularly the delayed maturation of the prefrontal cortex, which handles all that complex emotional regulation combined with an overactive amygdala.
Wait, so the amygdala is the part that handles fear and stress,
Yeah.
right?
So it means he genuinely does not know how to process intense feelings without feeling extremely vulnerable.
Oh, and in the social hierarchy of young men, vulnerability is literally equated with weakness.
Bingo. So the moment he feels too much, his defense mechanism just kicks in and he physically or emotionally retreats.
He just shuts down.
He shuts down.
And the advice these guides give to you, the listener, is incredibly blunt, like almost jarringly blunt.
Yeah, they don't mince words.
They say, give him space and stay chill. Chasing makes him run faster.
Which sounds like common sense, sure.
Right. But when you are in the anxiety of being ignored, staying chill is literally the hardest thing in the world.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
Because your instinct, when you feel a disconnect, is to bridge that gap.
Yeah, you want to fix it.
You want clarity. You want to ask, hey, are we okay? Did I do something?
I've sent that text so many times in my life.
We all have.
Mm-hmm.
But the authors argue that if you apply pressure by chasing him for that clarity, you are just exacerbating his overwhelm.
You become the problem.
Basically, yeah. You transition from being a source of affection to becoming a source of the exact pressure he is desperately trying to escape from.
Okay, so that establishes this baseline of defensive withdrawal. But let's move out of high school and into the early 20s.
It's a whole new era of confusion.
Because this is the era that these guides define as the absolute peak of mixed signals and modern dating chaos.
Oh, for sure.
And they tackle the ultimate modern relationship villain here, ghosting.
Oh, yes, ghosting.
I mean, you've been on 3 great dates. He talked about introducing you to his friends and then just absolute radio silence. Nothing.
It's brutal.
It is. But the texts argue that men in their early 20s ghost for one primary reason. They are fundamentally conflict avoidant.
Yes, but let's break down what conflict avoidant actually means in this specific context.
Okay, lay it on me.
It's not just that they don't like arguing, you know. The source material suggests that for a young man, the prospect of sitting down and having an awkward, emotionally charged conversation.
Like saying, I had a great time, but I don't see this going anywhere.
Exactly. Having to say that triggers a massive spike in cortisol.
Really? Like an actual physical response.
Yeah, it is a genuine stress response in his body. It is simply neurologically and emotionally easier for him to disappear into the ether than to face the discomfort of disappointing you to your face.
It's the path of least resistance.
100%.
The text actually posits that ghosting usually means one of 2 things. He either simply lost interest, or paradoxically, he got scared because things were getting too real too fast, and he just lacked the vocabulary to navigate that intensity.
And this is exactly where the guides introduce a core tenet of their whole philosophy, the divergence in communication styles.
Right. The men are from Mars thing.
Sort of, yeah. The overarching claim is that men, particularly in this early 20s age bracket, are simply not wired to process or vocalize their emotional states using the same linguistic tools that women naturally deploy.
Right. Let me grab the exact quote here. It says, most men aren't wired to talk about emotions the same way women are. They show love through actions.
Through actions.
Fixing things, protecting you, spending time. They explicitly tell the reader to watch what he does, not what he says.
Which is a huge shift for a lot of people.
It really is. It actually makes me think of an analogy. Trying to understand a young guy's feelings by waiting for him to articulate them is like trying to read a menu in a foreign language, but you're using the completely wrong dictionary.
I like that. That's a highly practical way to look at it. The expectation of a verbal emotional audit is basically just the wrong dictionary.
Exactly. You, the listener, might be sitting on the couch, agonizing over a 3-word text message, right? Waiting for this beautifully articulated, vulnerable sonnet about his feelings for you.
Meanwhile,
the guy is in your kitchen writing you a 5-page essay in the language of acts of service. because he just spent 45 minutes at Home Depot trying to find the exact right washer to fix your leaky sink.
Yeah.
To him, fixing the sink is the sonnet.
And the tragedy of that dynamic, according to these guides, is that both people end up feeling completely unappreciated.
Oh, totally.
He feels like his massive effort to fix your life goes unnoticed because you are upset he didn't say, I missed you in a text message.
And you feel unloved because he's talking about plumbing instead of his feelings.
Right. So the authors are aggressively urging the listener to become fluent in the language of action.
Learn his language.
Yeah, because if you demand words from someone who only speaks in actions, you will perpetually feel unloved and he will perpetually feel inadequate.
Okay, but I have to throw some friction into this because this framing bothers me a little bit, if I'm being honest.
Let's hear it.
Well, the text explicitly claims that ghosting is just conflict avoidance and a lack of emotional vocabulary.
Yes.
But by framing it that way, by basically shrugging and saying, well, it's just his natural wiring not to talk about it, he's just scared of conflict, are these authors essentially letting men off the hook for what is undeniably bad, disrespectful behavior?
I mean, it's a fair question. And it's actually the most common critique of this entire genre of advice.
I would imagine so.
But if we look strictly at what the text is trying to achieve,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's letting them off the hook morally. It's attempting to change the metric of evaluation for the listener.
What do you mean?
These guides are incredibly pragmatic. They honestly do not care about what a man should do in a perfect, morally upright world. They only care about what he will do in reality.
So it's more about emotional self-defense for the reader.
Precisely. By framing ghosting as a deficit in his conflict resolution skills, rather than a reflection of your worth, the text is trying to remove the agonizing sting of rejection.
It's taking it from personal to practical.
Exactly. It's telling you, hey, he didn't disappear because you aren't pretty enough or smart enough. He disappeared because he lacks the adult tools to navigate minor conflict.
So don't take it to heart.
Right. And the prescribed fix isn't to somehow teach him those tools. The fix is to protect your own energy.
Match his effort, right?
Yes, match his effort. If he gives you one text a week, you don't sit down and write a 3-paragraph emotional check-in. You match the baseline.
It's a really brutal kind of pragmatism. So we've established that in the early 20s, distancing and ghosting are framed as hallmarks of this youthful conflict avoidance. But if that explains the 22-year-old, what explains the 32-year-old? Because the texts argue that this distancing behavior doesn't just magically disappear when a man gets older and finally learns how to communicate.
No, it definitely doesn't.
Men continue to distance themselves even in serious, deeply committed, mature relationships. But the underlying engine driving that distance completely changes.
This is a major transition in the source material, and it addresses a phenomenon that causes immense anxiety for a lot of people.
I bet.
It's the question of why men pull away just when a relationship is getting incredibly good.
Right. Everything is going great, and then bam.
Yeah, you've passed the dating phase, you are in a serious partnership, intimacy is really deepening, and suddenly he gets quiet.
And she takes longer to text back.
He spends way more time in the garage or at the gym or at work, and it's no longer about the adolescent fear of looking weak, and it's not the early 20s inability to have a basic conversation.
So what is it?
It's a completely different mechanism.
They use a very specific metaphor for this in the books. And look, I know this sounds like a cliche pulled straight from a 1990s daytime talk show, but they lean heavily into the rubber band instinct.
Ah, yes, the rubber band.
The authors argue that a man has a natural, almost biological need to pull back in order to regain a sense of his own independence right before he can snap back and come closer to you.
I mean, even if the metaphor feels a bit dated, the psychological concept they are trying to illustrate is deeply rooted in attachment theory.
Okay, so there's real science there.
Yeah. The text insists that this adult distancing is rarely a sign of waning affection. It's not that he likes you less.
That's a huge relief to hear.
Right. This rubber band effect is usually triggered by external stress, like at work, or maybe a sudden suffocating fear of losing his personal autonomy.
Or just an internal period of questioning.
Exactly. A highly solitary period of questioning his own readiness for the next level of commitment.
They actually describe it as him retreating to his cave to process.
The infamous man cave.
Right. And the most controversial part of this section is the absolutely rigid advice it gives you on how to handle it.
It's very strict.
It says the most powerful, effective move you can make when you feel him pulling away is complete, utter inaction.
Do nothing.
Do nothing, do not panic, do not chase, just sit there.
Which runs counter to every single anxious attachment trigger a person might have.
Oh, exactly.
Hmm.
Because if we look at the physics of an actual rubber band, the metaphor actually makes a twisted kind of sense.
How so?
Well, a rubber band needs tension to have any kinetic energy. If you are holding one end and he is holding the other and he starts stepping backward to stretch it out, he is building tension.
Right, he feels the stretch.
Right. He's feeling that stretch. But if you panic and
Right.
you walk toward him to try to close the gap, the rubber band just goes completely slack.
It just drops.
It drops to the floor. There is no tension, no pull, no energy left to snap him back to you. The text is basically saying you have to stand your ground and let the tension build, even if it's completely terrifying.
It's a fascinating application of physics to psychology, really. If you close the distance for him out of your own anxiety by asking, hey, what's wrong? A dozen times.
Or constantly trying to initiate physical affection when he's clearly distant.
Yes, exactly. If you do that, you eliminate the very space he supposedly needs to feel the desire to return to you.
You suffocate the desire.
By standing still, you allow the natural tension of absence to do the heavy lifting. The strategy outlined here is to remain what they call high value.
Where's that term again?
Right. And in this specific context, being high value means not putting your own emotional equilibrium on hold, waiting for him to regulate his.
Well, let's inject some reality into this for a second, because standing perfectly still while the person you love drifts away is agonizing.
It's incredibly hard.
So how does the text suggest you differentiate between a rubber band guy who genuinely just needs a weekend to play video games and process his work stress, and a rubber band that is stretching because he is actually checked out and leaving the relationship entirely?
That's the million-dollar question.
It feels like an incredibly risky game of chicken.
It is a massive risk. And to be fair to the critique of these texts, they don't offer a magical diagnostic tool to tell the difference in the moment.
They don't.
No. Instead, their philosophy is grounded in outcome dependence.
Meaning what?
The implication is that the differentiation only becomes clear through the result of your inaction. If he is a rubber band, the space will eventually cause him to process his stress and return to you with renewed focus and energy.
And if he's not a rubber band, what if he just keeps walking?
Then your inaction simply means you haven't wasted weeks of your life and shreds of your dignity chasing someone who was already out the door.
Oh, wow.
The core philosophy here is that you cannot force a man to stay who genuinely wants to leave. Therefore, the only logically sound, self-protective response to a man pulling away is to hold your ground, live your life, and let his actions reveal his true intentions.
It's essentially saying, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, but never surrender your own center of gravity. Okay, so let's say you do this. You hold your ground, he stretches out, he processes his stress, and he feels the tension. What actually pulls him back?
Ah, now we get to the core of it.
Right, because if the rubber band is going to successfully snap back to you, there has to be an incredibly heavy anchor holding your end of the band in place.
Yes.
And according to the deepest dives in these sources, that anchor, the thing that brings a man back and keeps him devoted for decades, isn't actually love.
No, it's not.
It's not physical attraction either. It's a completely different psychological currency.
We are now crossing into the most heavily emphasized section of all these materials.
This is the big one.
It really is. The authors treat this as the ultimate secret to male psychology. They literally preface this section in the book by telling the reader to stop, take a slow, deep breath, and prepare for a paradigm shift that will change how they view men forever.
It requires a deep breath because it directly attacks a very loud, very pervasive societal narrative.
Right.
For decades, pop culture, movies, and cynical internet forums have told women that men only care about three things: looks, sex, and youth.
The classic trio.
Right. But the authors claim that the actual hard data on male psychology absolutely destroys that narrative. They concede the obvious, of course. Yes, physical attraction opens the door, gets his attention on day one.
Sure.
But what keeps him home, what makes him commit his entire life to you, is emotional safety and profound, unwavering respect.
And they don't just throw this out as a nice philosophical thought. They bring in heavy quantitative statistics to back it up.
You owe me the numbers.
Well, they cite a massive survey of over 1,000 men regarding what they desired most from a long-term partner. The final results: respect outranked love.
Unbelievable.
It outranked sex. It outranked physical appearance.
They drop a very specific number in the book. 91% of the men surveyed said they would rather feel respected by their partner than hear the words, I love you.
It's wild.
Mm-hmm.
They also reference a landmark sociological study published in the journal Personal Relationships.
Okay, what did that one say?
The researchers in that study found that a partner's outward display of respect is a stronger predictor of a man's relationship satisfaction than displays of affection.
Wow.
Yeah. For a man, respect isn't just a bonus feature of a healthy dynamic. It is the load-bearing pillar.
But let's go back to that statistic I used to hook everyone at the very beginning of this deep dive. Out of all the numbers, this is the one that just stopped me cold.
This 74%?
Yes. The study asking men to choose between being alone and unloved or being loved but viewed as inadequate and disrespected, 74% chose isolation.
It's a staggering choice.
Let's really unpack the psychology of that. Are these authors suggesting that men compartmentalize love and respect into two entirely different bank accounts?
Basically, yeah.
Because for most people listening, love and respect are a package deal, you know? You cannot truly love someone if you disrespect them. To love someone is to respect them.
That is exactly the disconnect the authors are trying to highlight. Yes. The premise here is that men absolutely process love and respect through separate psychological channels. And more importantly, the respect account is the primary account.
The respect account is primary.
Right. You can pour endless amounts of affection, physical intimacy, and verbal declarations of love into the love account. But if the respect account is overdrawn...
If he feels criticized or belittled.
Exactly. If he feels inadequate, the entire relationship is bankrupt.
So if a relationship is struggling, a woman's instinct might be to offer more love. She plans a romantic date, she gets more affectionate, she tries to talk about their feelings.
Right, and the authors argue that this is fundamentally the wrong medicine.
It doesn't work.
Offering more love to a man who feels disrespected is like pouring water on a grease fire. It doesn't solve the core deficiency. He is starved for validation of his competence, not validation of his lovability.
But respect is such a massive, abstract concept. How do these guides actually define it in the day-to-day trenches of a relationship?
That's a great question.
Because we aren't talking about saluting him when he walks in the door, right? What does this look like on a Tuesday night in the kitchen?
They break it down into very specific, actionable, and sometimes quite challenging behaviors.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, it means showing genuine appreciation for his efforts, particularly the small, mundane acts of service we discussed earlier.
Fixing the sink.
Right. It means noticing that he changed the oil or fixed the Wi-Fi and actually acknowledging it out loud.
They also put a massive emphasis on public trust in the book. It specifically says that respecting him means trusting his decisions. And this is huge, not second-guessing him or correcting him in public or in front of your friends.
That is a critical point in the text. The fastest way to devastate a man's ego, according to this framework, is public correction.
Even if he's telling a story wrong at a dinner party.
Even then, let him tell it wrong. It also heavily warns against the use of sarcasm during conflicts.
Oh, that's tough. Sarcasm is my love language.
I know, a lot of people use it as a shield. But sarcasm, eye-rolling, and constant questioning of his judgment create an environment of emotional chaos and inadequacy for him.
It makes him feel unsafe.
Exactly. The text argues that men, above all else, want their home to be a place of peace. If he feels like he is constantly on trial in his own living room, he will eventually leave, even if he loves you.
It ultimately comes down to making him feel like a hero. And I know that word hero triggers some people because it sounds like a damsel in distress fantasy.
It does sound a bit retro.
It does. But the texts clarify that it's not about playing dumb or being helpless. It's about finding genuine ways to make him feel essential and capable in your life.
Which transitions us perfectly into the why behind all of this.
Yeah. Why is it like this?
Why is respect more important than love? Why does he need to feel like a hero? This extreme need for respect isn't just a quirk of modern dating. These guides argue it is inextricably tied to his biology.
This is where the claims get really intense. The texts make a firm, unapologetic biological argument here.
Very unapologetic.
They assert that men are biologically wired, not just socially conditioned by cultural norms or the patriarchy, but physically, evolutionarily wired to be providers and protectors.
And they attempt to map this psychological need directly onto the male endocrine system.
Like hormones.
Yes. The argument is that when a woman makes a man feel like he is succeeding in this provider and protector role, it triggers a physiological feedback loop.
How does that work?
When he feels competent and respected, his testosterone levels actually stabilize or rise. This biological reward system decreases his stress hormones, increases his confidence, and functionally deepens his neurological attachment to the woman who triggered the response.
So it's literally a chemical dependency.
Basically, yeah.
The text uses an incredible phrase. It describes a woman's admiration and appreciation as pure rocket fuel for a man's love.
Rocket fuel.
Yeah. They are saying his romantic attachment is completely linked to his sense of utility. If he feels useless around you, if you do everything yourself, fix everything yourself, and constantly remind him that you don't need him.
He cannot fully attach to you.
Exactly. But if he feels capable and admired, his biology literally rewards him for being in your presence.
To support this, they bring in another survey finding. 88% of men surveyed wished their partner made them feel desired, not just loved.
Desired, that's a very specific word.
Right, and desired in this context doesn't just mean sexually. The text explains they want to know that you choose them, that you're
Yeah.
proud to be with them. It's about ego validation.
They use the word ego repeatedly. They state that a man's ego is the gateway to his heart.
Which is funny, right?
It is, because usually we talk about the male ego as a toxic element, something fragile that needs to be dismantled or tiptoed around so he doesn't get mad.
Right, it has a bad rap.
But here, it's framed as functional machinery. Let's
Mhm.
refine that solar panel analogy from earlier. If his ego is a solar panel, it isn't inherently vain or evil.
No, it's just a tool.
It is a piece of machinery that functionally requires the direct sunlight of your admiration and respect to generate the power needed to run the relationship. But it's more fragile than just a lack of sun.
Right, let's take that analogy a step further. If the ego is the solar panel, then criticism and sarcasm are just a cloud blocking the sun.
Well, are they?
The text argues that consistent disrespect actually shatters the glass. It breaks the mechanism of attachment entirely.
And the source material provides exact, word-for-word phrases you can use to protect that solar panel and unlock this biological response.
The scripts are very specific.
Very. It recommends looking at him and saying things like, "I feel so safe with you," or "I love how you handle things."
If you analyze the linguistics of those specific phrases, they are masterclasses in accessing that protector and provider wiring.
How so?
Well, saying "I feel so safe with you" directly validates his evolutionary role as a physical and emotional protector.
Ah, I see.
And saying "I love how you handle things" validates his role as a competent problem solver. You aren't just complimenting his outfit, you're reinforcing his core identity.
Okay, so we have laid out the mechanics here. We know ghosting is conflict avoidance. We know adult pulling away is the rubber band instinct.
We know respect is more important than love.
Right, and that his ego requires the rocket fuel of admiration to attach to you. That is the engine of the relationship.
Yep, that's the whole engine.
But here is the ultimate question of this entire deep dive. If you know how the engine works, how do you actually get him to commit to the journey?
How do you close the deal?
Exactly. How do you get him to buy the ring, sign the mortgage, and drive the car? Especially today, when the timeline for commitment has been completely blown up.
That brings us to the final section of our sources, and it is heavily featured in the overarching promotional materials, particularly that $9 audiobook, Mastering the Game.
Okay, what's their secret?
To understand the modern strategy for commitment, the authors introduce a crucial piece of contextual data. The median age for men getting married has now climbed to 30.8 years old.
30.8. That is a massive demographic shift from our parents' or grandparents' generations.
It changes the entire landscape of dating. The texts use this statistic to argue that modern men are actively and intentionally delaying serious legal commitment until they feel fully established.
They want all their ducks in a row.
Exactly. They want to feel financially secure, they want to have their career on track, and they want to feel capable of leading a family.
So what does that mean for the listener?
Because of this extended timeline, the authors insist on one absolute rule. Forcing or pressuring a man into commitment is statistically impossible. You cannot nag a man into a proposal.
The moment you give an ultimatum, you introduce conflict, which spikes his cortisol, which makes him view you as a source of stress rather than a source of peace.
Exactly. It backfires instantly. So if ultimatums don't work, what is the strategy? The texts outline a highly specific and somewhat controversial playbook. The core directive is that you must become what they term a high-value woman.
A high-value woman.
You have to become the entity he realizes he simply cannot afford to lose.
And their definition of a high-value woman is a very delicate, highly calibrated balancing act.
It sounds exhausting, honestly.
It does, because on one hand, you must project absolute independence. You have to have clear standards, your own robust social life, your own goals, and a sense of mystery.
You can't just be sitting by the phone.
Right, you cannot sit around being overly available or desperate for his time. If he pulls away, you don't chase.
And this is where the balance comes in. You cannot be cold, bitter, or guarded.
So you have to be independent but not aloof.
Exactly. The text explicitly states that while you maintain this independence, you must simultaneously remain warm, playful, and deeply feminine in his presence. You have to combine an ironclad confidence with a welcoming softness.
And the execution of this strategy relies on a system of behavioral reinforcement.
Yes, the behavioral stuff.
The explicit instruction is to reward his good behavior, like when he plans a date, when he communicates well, when he fixes the sink with intense warmth, admiration, and affection.
But when he behaves poorly.
Right. When he behaves poorly or when he goes into his rubber band phase and pulls away, you do not start an argument. You simply step back, remove your attention, and focus on your own life.
The overarching goal, as the authors elegantly phrase it, is to be his peace, not his drama.
Be his peace.
The theory is that if you provide a sanctuary of respect, admiration, and emotional safety, while simultaneously demonstrating through your independence that you do not need him to survive,
Then what?
commitment will ultimately feel like his idea. He will look around at the dating landscape, realize he has found a rare, peaceful environment where his ego is safe and he feels like a hero, and he will lock it down because he fears another man will take you.
We really need to pause and contextualize how this information is being packaged and sold to the consumer.
Yeah, the marketing side is fascinating.
Because we are looking at the advertisement for this audiobook, Mastering the Game, it is packaging this entire philosophy, this deep dive into testosterone, the rubber band, the high-value playbook, as a commodified secret you can buy for $9.
And it uses all these modern internet hashtags like manifest love and female empowerment.
Which is kind of ironic.
Very. It takes advice that historically might have been viewed as submissive, stroke his ego, don't argue with him, be his peace, and completely rebrands it. It frames the act of decoding and managing male behavior as priceless power.
That framing is brilliant from a marketing perspective, sure, but it's also vital to the philosophy.
How so?
The authors are acutely aware that advising women to cater to a man's ego and avoid demanding communication could easily be interpreted as regressive.
Oh, absolutely.
The source explicitly defends against this critique by stating, this isn't manipulation or submission. This is understanding baseline male nature and working with the current instead of swimming exhausting miles against it.
Well, that's one way to spin it.
I have to push back on the phrasing, though. Let's look at the literal words. Reward good behavior with warmth and affection, and remove attention when he pulls away.
Yeah?
When I read that out loud, it sounds an awful lot like operant conditioning. It sounds like dog training.
It really does.
How do these sources, or how do we, draw the line between setting healthy, empowered boundaries and just engaging in calculated transactional behavioral conditioning?
It's the ethical friction at the core of all strategic relationship advice, isn't it?
Yeah, feels a little icky.
The authors would likely counter by arguing that all human relationships involve behavioral conditioning to some degree.
I suppose that's true.
We naturally gravitate toward people who validate us and make us feel good, and we naturally pull away from people who criticize us and make us feel stressed. They would argue that by consciously choosing to reward positive actions with warmth, rather than punishing negative actions with a stressful argument, you're simply utilizing positive reinforcement to curate a healthy dynamic.
So they would say you're just being intentional about the conditioning that is already happening anyway.
Exactly. However, your critique is totally valid. Reducing complex, nuanced human interactions to a transactional stimulus response training program can feel incredibly clinical.
It does.
It risks stripping the authenticity out of the connection entirely.
Which brings us to the end of our journey through these materials. Let's do a final synthesis of everything we've unpacked today, from the teenage years all the way up to the high-value marriage strategy.
Okay, to summarize the entire framework, These texts collectively argue that successfully navigating a long-term relationship with a man requires a fundamental shift in a woman's expectations.
A big shift.
Huge. It requires accepting that his baseline communication will likely always be action-oriented rather than verbal.
Watch what he does.
Right. It requires respecting the physics of his rubber band need for space when he feels stressed without internalizing it as rejection.
To stand still.
Yes. And most importantly, it requires recognizing that deep respect, the validation of his capability, and the provision of a peaceful environment are the biological and psychological keys to unlocking his devotion.
And I want to reiterate as we close this out that we are simply the messengers here.
Yes, strictly decoders today.
We have spent this time decoding these incredibly popular relationship guides to show you the mechanics of what they are teaching and why so many people buy them. We are not telling you this is the definitive way you must run your romantic life.
Not at all.
We are showing you the blueprint that is driving a massive sector of relationship culture right now.
Because knowledge is most valuable when it is understood and applied with critical thinking.
Exactly.
Understanding these frameworks, knowing about the 74% respect statistic or the conflict avoidance of a ghoster, gives you the ability to recognize these patterns in the wild. You can choose to adopt the high-value playbook, or you can completely reject it, but now you understand the architecture behind it.
Exactly. And to that end, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought to mull over.
Give them something to think about.
This builds on the material we've discussed today, but it asks a question the texts themselves seem to avoid entirely.
Okay, what is it?
These sources place an enormous emphasis on you becoming a safe place. The ultimate strategy is to be his peace, not his drama. You are instructed to be a highly calibrated mix of confident yet soft, independent yet intensely admiring.
A very tall order.
Right. But if the burden of managing the relationship's emotional temperature falls entirely on you,
Right.
what happens when you are the one who is stressed?
Oh, that's a great point.
What happens when you get laid off or you have a family crisis and you don't have the energy to stroke an ego or monitor a rubber band? What happens when you are the one who needs a safe harbor in a moment to fall apart?
Who is your peace?
Exactly. Does this model of rewarding good behavior and maintaining high-value peace actually allow for mutual, messy human vulnerability? Or does it ultimately require you to put on a permanent, exhausting performance just to keep him from pulling away?
That is a profound question about the long-term sustainability of this whole model.
Mm.
It forces us to look past the immediate gratification of securing a commitment and ask what kind of relationship you are actually committing to.
Think about that the next time you are staring at a coded text message or sitting in sudden silence. Because sometimes when you are looking at a communication breakdown, wondering why your dictionary isn't working, the problem isn't that you haven't found the right translation. The problem might be that you are the only one in the room trying to learn a second language.
That's powerful.
Thanks for joining the deep dive today. Keep questioning the information around you.